afternoon, everyone. If you're here for the composting class, you're in the right spot. And we'll wait a couple more minutes for people to trickle in, but I might get started with some housekeeping. So thank you all for being here. I know it's getting harder to sign on to these things just with being tired of so many Zoom meetings. So really appreciate that you're here, and hopefully you can take some new information away about worm composting and composting. And let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Can y'all see my slides without the notes? Sorry.
Hey, Hannah, we can see them. They're just a little small. I don't know if you can make them a little bigger.
Thanks, Madeline. Here, let's try this. Is that showing up better?
Much better. Perfect.
Good deal. All right, so thanks for coming this afternoon. I'm Hannah Lepsch with North Carolina Cooperative Extension. I'm the horticulture agent here in Yadkin County. And this is the first class of a two-part series. Today we're going to talk about composting and worm composting. And then the plan was to meet on Thursday to do a workshop in person on building a worm bin. But we are going to postpone that till next week, next Tuesday, the 17th, at 3 p.m. at our community garden, because it's an outdoor event and it looks like we're going to be getting a couple inches of rain the night before, and the weather is just not going to cooperate. So at the end of the meeting, I'll put a link to that follow-up workshop. You can sign up. For those who are already here that are on that or signed up for that as well, we are going to move it till next week on the 17th. So I'm hoping we can make this webinar a little interactive. I'll be having some poll questions. And then towards the end, we'll have some videos that I and a couple master gardeners have put together. And I encourage you, if you have questions, just type them into the chat. And then I'll take breaks once in a while to check that chat and answer questions that I can. And then we'll definitely have some time at the end where you can unmute and ask questions, and I'll make sure any questions in the chat are answered. And just in case you aren't that familiar with Zoom, the way to do that chat function is scroll your cursor towards the bottom of the screen. There should be a black bar. It looks something like this. And you can, on the left, you can mute or unmute yourself, turn off your video. I'll just ask if you stay muted during the call. And if we get some connection trouble, I may ask you to turn your video off, but we're a pretty small group right now, so on or off is fine on the video. And then there's a little speech bubble icon kind of midway across your screen that will pull up a chat box that you can type your questions into. I will try to remember to check those. All right. As we get going, I just want to say a big thank you to my partners on this composting workshop. Pat Jakes, who's on the call today. She is not only a master gardener, but also a master composter. And you'll see here in some of the videos. And then Ricky Swaim, who's a worm composter and a master gardener in Yadkin County. And then I have a colleague who's helped put together these slides, Hallie Casey. So to all of them, a big shout out. So composting, we'll just launch into some background on composting, and then I'll stop and I'll check for questions, and then we'll work into or go over some worm composting techniques at the end. So composting is a natural process. It happens in the environment without our help. And forest floors and grasslands and the top few inches of soil, and it's happens to anything living that dies, and then it breaks down through decomposition, ultimately returning down to earth or back to earth. So in a backyard composting system, what we're doing is simply speeding up that process by creating the optimum environment for those decomposers like earthworms and microbes. And this webinar is going to show you how to create that optimum environment or how to do it better. So it's always good to start with the definition. Compost is organic matter, usually food waste or farm detritus, leaves, dry leaves, hay, grass clippings, anything derived from plant matter that has been decomposed into a usable as a soil amendment. And I should say animal byproducts like bones or eggshells or chicken fats, they can be composted and actually make really great compost, but we don't typically recommend those for a backyard composting bin because you really need a very high temperature in your compost pile to make sure they're broken down and then safe to be put back on the garden. So the ingredients that go into compost starts with organics. So anything that was once alive can be composted. That's food waste, yard waste, manure, anything organic based material. And then tiny organisms step in to break down that organic material. These are mainly fungi, bacteria, earthworms, nematodes, which are another type of worm. And they do that in an aerobic environment, so an environment with air. And then if you add some time to that equation, it may be 6 months, it may be just 3 months, then you'll end up with the final product, which is a crumbly, decomposed organic matter here on the right. And that is finished compost, which gardeners lovingly call their black gold because it is a great soil conditioner. It makes nutrients available, and we'll talk more about its benefits, but we're always learning about new benefits from compost and using it in soil and gardens. So I'm going to try to switch over to a video, and please someone shout out if the sound doesn't come through. I'm expecting it will work, but let's see. All right, here goes.
To start collecting your vegetable scraps for organic material for your compost bins, whether you're doing vermicomposting or regular composting, just keep a bin or dish or bucket near your kitchen sink and toss everything in there that you're not going to use, or it's scraps or leftovers or maybe slightly overripe. For your compost bin or for your vermicompost, you should cut it up into small pieces. Especially for the vermicompost, they appreciate you chopping it up as small as you can. It'll decompose much faster that way. If you live in the triad area, you probably have clay soil like this, which can harden into pieces like brick. And you really need to add a lot of organic material to get it into usable soil that the plants can send their roots down into and absorb those nutrients. When you first start adding your compost, building your compost bins or vermicomposting bins, they'll still look like this. You'll still be able to recognize pieces of the materials that you've used, whether it's leaves or vegetable parts. And as it matures and becomes ready to be used, your finished compost will look like this. It'll be loose and airy and very absorbent, and it does not have any foul odors. If it does, you've done something wrong. And vermicompost looks much the same, but much finer and easier to use in things like seed starting or in house plants.
Okay, thank you, Pat. That was a quick overview of the composting process from Pat Jakes. And go back to our slides here. So why would we compost? So anyone can compost anywhere, and there's lots of good reasons to do so. First of all, it's a way to divert waste from our landfills. Simply by composting, even if you're not doing putting a lot of effort into it, you're just stockpiling materials from your kitchen or from your lawn. You're keeping items out of our landfills, and that's reducing pollution. Composting also provides a value-added product for gardens. It closes the loop, making your system more sustainable. So what you're producing is actually going back into the soil to produce more crops in the future. And then compost enhances both soil and plant health. And scientists are always learning new ways that organic matter from compost or other cover crops, other ways to build soil organic matter actually improves plants' resistance to disease, their production. So it's a really big benefit to gardens and agriculture. I'm a soil scientist, so I have to just talk for a minute about the benefits of compost has for soils. In this picture over here, you see a picture of clay soil under a microscope. And clay is what most of our soils are like here in Yadkin County and across the Piedmont area. Clays are really tightly packed together. You see these kind of sheets in this image. And those are those clay minerals. It's very hard for water and air to get in there, to get into the soil, because clay minerals are so tightly and densely bound together. And adding compost or other sources of organic matter loosens up that soil texture, improving water infiltration. That's the rate at which water can get into the soil, move from rain or surface water and percolate into the soil instead of running off and carrying with it our valuable topsoil. It also helps with drainage. This will keep water from ponding on the soil surface and also let roots have oxygen, which they need as well as water. And kind of as I mentioned, it does that by creating pore spaces in the soil. And you see these two images, a soil with low organic matter or low compost, no compost in it on the top. The particles are more tightly, densely packed. And then on the bottom, a soil with more organic matter will have these large fluffy pieces of organic material opening up that pore space. And that's what really promotes better infiltration and drainage in a soil. Compost can also help with the workability or tilth of your soil. It gives it that's that granular quality that's ideal for plants to grow. And then a huge benefit of compost is that it promotes microbial abundance and diversity. And microbes are just tiny organisms that live in your soil. What makes soil is the fact that it's alive and it's filled with organisms that are at work. And this includes fungus, which are in the same family as mushrooms, bacteria, which they're the most abundant soil microbes, nematodes. This is a picture of a nematode up close in this photo. And then of course, earthworms, which we're going to talk a lot more about later in this webinar. And these not only build our compost, but they work in the soil to even break down that compost more and build soil organic matter, which makes soils dark and rich. And that's a sign of a very healthy soil. So I'm going to stop and we're going to some different composting systems. There's lots of ways to speed up this process of decomposing organic matter, which is basically what composting is. One system is the heap or bin system. It's very common. It doesn't require a lot of active management. It can be easily turned or harvested. And it may be a loose pile, or it can be confined into a bin. And we still are using aerobic or an environment with oxygen for these microbes to break down materials in these heaps or bins. You have an option with a heap or bin composting system, whether to use a hot or a cold compost system. And it really depends on how much effort you want to put into your pile. Cold composting is just a more passive process. It requires little effort at all. You could just be simply piling up your leaves on the edge of a woods, but it takes usually over a year to decompose with this strategy. And then there's also hot or active composting, and that's shown in this bin right here, where you're turning the composting, you're keeping your compost, you're keeping it moist, and that's allowing oxygen to flow in, heat up that pile, and it actually is a process that kills most pathogens and weed seeds. So the finished product is really very safe to put back in your garden, without worrying about adding any disease or weeds to your beds. And then you can also, the differences between a heap or a bin. A bin is not required, but your neighbors may appreciate something a little bit more aesthetically pleasing in your backyard. It can be helpful to have two sections instead of just one pile or bin, because you can be adding fresh materials to one side and then turning them in, and then turning them over into the other side to finish decomposing. So usually 4 to 5 feet squares the largest heap or bin size we recommend. And then yes, 2 sections are helpful, one for fresh material and one for curing. And then I always get lots of questions about these manufactured bins. And they are quite popular in some areas, but they can be very expensive. The benefits are that they come with a cover, and so they keep critters out pretty effectively. But most of the bins are not large enough to handle your yard waste, your leaves, your sticks. So you typically would want a second pile to stockpile leaves in the fall. And then you can slowly add them into, and actually you need to break them up quite a bit to fit them into these manufactured bins. The 2 bins I've seen work best, one's the Earth Machine here on the left. There's also one called Free Garden Earth, which looks very similar, but it's still difficult to mix them. And the idea is you add fresh material on the top and then let the finished material out on a door at the bottom. They work fairly well, but you'll have to work to mix them well. I also get questions about compost tumblers. That's this round item here on the right of the screen. And to be honest, our compost extension specialist does not recommend people use a tumbler at all. There was a recent email going around between agents trying to find some tumbler that we could recommend. And basically we ended the conversation with, there really isn't a great one out there. They're either break quickly or they're hard to turn. So we typically point people to a stationary manufactured bin or just building their own out of wooden plats or a pile. So that's some detail about manufactured bins, because I do get asked about them a lot. Other ways to compost, there's pit composting. This is a temporary setup where you're adding primarily food waste to a hole in the ground and making layers of that and manure and leaves. And that is a form of this is called Hegel gardening, which I know some people who are experienced with this. I am not, but it's an effective way to build a really a bed rich in organic matter, and it ends up looking something like this. And this is a form of pit composting. Yes, and it's created by adding up these layers of carbon-rich leaves, sticks, straw, and then more nitrogen-rich food waste and manures. And then finally, we have vermicomposting. And vermicomposting really harnesses the power of worms as well as microbes to make compost. We're going to go into a lot more depth about how to make a worm composting bin, but a couple notes up front: they require some active management. You just can't make them and leave them, and they require you making sure you're feeding worms a balanced diet. So being careful what you're feeding them and how much. And this photo, there's two different systems. This is a kind of a manufactured worm hotel. It has a nice spigot in the bottom to let out some of the excess liquid. That can be used as a liquid fertilizer. And then over here on the left is a more large scale worm farm setup with these brick-lined bins. And inside is the worms and organic materials doing their vermicomposting thing. All right, so now I'm going to talk about how to make compost. This is how to make compost well. And it starts with 4 basic ingredients: carbon, nitrogen, air, and water. But getting these ingredients into the right balance for an active composting bin can be quite an art. I will keep in mind though that even if you're not able to have a rapidly composting bin, it's still beneficial by diverting waste from landfills, and it will eventually decompose and create compost. It just may take a year or more. We usually divide composting bins into dry and fresh materials. So dry are what we call browns. These are carbon heavy materials like straw, brown leaves, cardboard, and then greens are nitrogen rich materials like your kitchen scraps and manure. And what's happening in a compost bin is microbes are feeding on this nitrogen rich greens material in the presence of carbon, which is your dry material. So your dry materials create the environment for the microbes that are feeding off this green material. And the perfect compost bin, or a well-balanced compost bin, will have a mixture of both to facilitate really rapid decomposition. So some things you want to add and not add to your compost bin. First, in the dry category, your browns, you can use cardboard, want to break it down or shred it as much as possible, paper, dried leaves, straw. You can also use in the green, for your green materials, kitchen scraps work well, weeds without seeds. Your harvest pumpkins that we're seeing all around make great composting materials and also great food for your worms. Worms really love squash and pumpkins. And also manures can be used in usually larger scale composting systems. And then some things you want to keep out of your composting bin are any dairy products, meat, fish, and plastics, and then you want to avoid using lots of citrus. Okay, and some keys to keeping your composting healthy. I mentioned balance. Hopefully this slide doesn't look too technical, but your end product of your compost is going to be at a ratio of 30 carbon, 30 brown, 30 of your 30 to 1 brown material to green material, or carbon to nitrogen. And so if you have a compost pile that has a lot more browns than that ratio, then it won't decompose. It'll just be kind of sitting there, and composting will stop. If you get to a lower ratio where you're having closer to 10 to 1 carbon to nitrogen or browns to greens, this will be a really wet pile. It'll start to smell and attract flies. It'll also stop composting because it loses air, and air is needed for decomposition in compost piles. So you want to kind of find a balance of around 30 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. And there are fancy composting calculators out there where you can figure out how to do this balance really technically, but an easy way to usually get a bin that's working at this ratio is to add 3 parts carbon or 3 parts brown to 1 part nitrogen or 1 part green. So that would be 3 bags of leaves to 1 bag of vegetable scraps and those green materials that we saw earlier. So as you see, this is going to mean gathering and using or finding a lot more of those brown carbon-rich materials to add into your pile. And it typically means you have to stockpile those materials when they're available. So fall is a great time to be collecting leaves, collecting fallen stems and limbs to be adding into your compost pile throughout the year. Other things your compost pile needs to be healthy are air. Composting takes place primarily by aerobic decomposition or air using microbes. And so you need to maintain oxygen in your bin. And so a well-aerated, fluffy composting bin is what we're shooting for. And one way to get that done is to turn your pile periodically. And if you have a composting thermometer, which maybe if you're starting to really get into composting, I would encourage you investing in it. People turn their bin when they start to see the temperature of that compost pile drop. But if you're turning your bin every 2 weeks to a month, that should be enough to keep the oxygen flowing at a good rate for those microbes. If your bin starts to leak liquids or have a foul smell, then you need to be turning it more. And now is a great time to be looking around for leftover harvest decorations that you can be using to add to your compost bin to help with aeration, not only turning, but putting more coarsely textured pieces of organic matter like corn stalks or hay or sticks can really help with this, keeping this air in your compost bin. Moisture is important for the composting process. There's no life without water, and your composting is working off these living organisms. So a healthy compost bin is about 50% water. And it's easy to tell if you have the proper moisture level. If you take a handful of that compost and squeeze it, it should feel like a wet sponge, but not dripping. And like Pat mentioned, your compost really shouldn't have any sort of animal products or anything that will make you not want to reach in there and feel it. And so it's important that you can, check your moisture level every once in a while. And another way to kind of moderate that moisture, keep it from changing frequently is to cover a compost bin with a tarp or cover it with wood chips, leaves, kind of a cap of brown materials that'll keep both animals out and a good steady moisture level inside. So we're almost finished with this section. I'm just going to go through a step-by-step how to set up a compost bin. First, you're going to find a site. There's lots of flexibility here. Just kind of use common sense, keeping it about 6 feet away from buildings and ideally in the shade, so that it's not baking in the sun and drying out quickly. You also want it near a water source. You will most likely have to wet that composting bin or pile in the summer months. And like one of our master gardeners brings up, it's very easy for trees to want to send their roots into that compost pile. So be careful putting it right next to a tree, because it may be hard to collect the compost when you're ready to use it. It'll be full of roots, tree roots. We've talked a fair bit about bins, but there's a lot of options out there. In general, 2 bins or 2 sections of a pile, one where you can be adding fresh ingredients, and then another a bin or pile, a section to your pile where they're curing, will help you get an end product that's more uniform, that doesn't have pieces of fresh, undecomposed organic matter and then pieces of finished compost. So dividing up your bin is helpful. And then we talked about the raw materials, those greens and browns. And when you're assembling your composting pile, it's good to layer these. So put down a layer of browns. Twigs or stems are really best for this base layer because you can get air into the bottom of the pile. And then layer alternating between greens and browns as you build up the pile for the first time. You should also, it's also really recommended that you break down and chop up large pieces of your browns, especially, so they will decompose faster. So a perfect size is cutting them down to 2 to 4 inches before they go into the pile. So, and then monitor your pile to make sure that you are loving on your bugs. So you don't want to be, smelling foul odors, seeing a lot of flies, seeing liquid off the pile. That means that your microbes aren't happy, and you need to usually add more carbon to the pile, more browns, but be looking for those signs of an unhealthy composting bin or an unhappy bugs. And then finally, composting takes time. Like most things that we do in the garden, when you first start, it may take more than 6 months for it to break down and become compost. On average, I'd say 3 to 6 months is what people expect out of a compost pile. But with time, those microbes will break down really whatever organic materials you put in there. All right, and then a few frequently asked questions I get. Are there things from your yard that you cannot put into a compost bin? And a few of these are any weeds that have gone to seed. If you are sure that your compost is a hot and active composting system, and ideally you have a thermometer to check this, then you'll be fine with adding weed seeds, but it is, you do have to get temperatures above 150, 170 in that pile for those seeds to die. And any yard waste treated with pesticides, especially grass clippings, they get treated with broadleaf herbicides. They should not go into the compost pile. You will get you may get pesticide carryover into that compost, and that'll affect the plants you apply that compost to. Don't put diseased or insect infested plants in there. Black walnut tree leaves or twigs. Black walnuts are toxic to a lot of plants, and they cause them to wilt and not grow well. So in the composting pile, those toxins will harm whatever plants that compost goes on. So avoid black walnut And then pine needles just tend not to decompose very quickly. So not going to really be a benefit to you. I also get asked, how hot should a compost pile get? Aerobic decomposition just produces heat through the reaction, and mixing and turning your pile will help it heat up. Most piles will reach a temperature of about 130 to 150 degrees in the center, and you'll often see in the winter a compost pile with steam coming off of it, or you see a manure pile. The same thing's happening. That decomposition process is producing heat. For a compost pile, for the weed seeds and the pathogens to die in a compost pile, it needs to be at this temperature 130 to 150 for 15 days. And then about a month of these high temperatures, the temperature will drop, the pile will cool off, and it should cure for about another 4 to 12 more weeks. So this is maybe not something you need to be terribly concerned with unless you're trying to have a very active compost pile and you have a thermometer to monitor that temperature. But when you see that your pile's starting to feel cool, it's approaching that place of being done. And so when is compost done and ready to harvest? You can do this by reaching inside and feeling cool. The pile is cool. It should be brown, earthy smelling, have no odor, and usually this will be at about after 3 to 5 turns of that pile if you're turning every 2 weeks to a month. And a good way to double check is with a bag test. You can take a handful of that compost, seal it in a bag, and then open the bag after 4 to 5 days, and there should be no smell coming out of the bag. And if you're still not smelling anything, then that compost is finished and ready to roll. So it indicates that your compost is mature. All right, let me check and see if we have any questions. Oh, thank you. I just saw that my voice has gone down. I'll try to get closer. All right. So for the next section, we put together some videos to talk about vermicomposting. And I'm going to go ahead and share those, and then I have a few more slides, and there'll be time for questions and further clarification if questions come up about the videos. So just give me a minute while I get these going. All right. Bruce, I see your question and I will get to it. Hi, I'm Hannah Lepsch with North Carolina Cooperative Extension, and I'm going to show you how to build a worm bin with some everyday materials you can just get at your supermarket. So these are plastic tubs that you can use to make your own worm bed. You want it to be between 8 and 15 inches deep. So you have the option of a larger size or a smaller 8-inch deep bin. it may be good if you're starting with a small amount of worms to start with a smaller bin so you're not overfeeding them and it doesn't get smelly. And the important thing is that it comes with a lid and it's dark colored so it doesn't allow light in.
You can just get a plastic tub from Walmart or Dollar Store, anywhere you can find one.
So once you have your bin, you're going to make some holes in it, both for drainage out the bottom and aeration so your worms can have good air circulation. And I'll use a drill to make holes around the top rim. I'm just using a between 1/8 and 1/4 inch drill bit. And I'm going to show you how to drill holes in the bottom, which you need for drainage of any excess liquid. So your worms don't want to be too wet, so drainage is important. Drainage off of the fruit, the vegetable scraps that you've given them. And you'll take a drill, use a 1/4 inch drill bit is ideal. You don't want those worms escaping. And put about 6 to 8 holes in the bottom of your bin. Great. One of the biggest problems people have with worm bins is water collecting at the bottom, which leads to smelly odors, even flies and maggots in the vermicompost. So creating drainage holes at the beginning and even adding more if you're still finding your bin is too wet is important. So where am I going to put this bin when I am finally finished setting up the worm bin? Good locations are your garage, an outdoor shed, somewhere where it's not in direct sunlight, but the temperature is kind of moderated, so not too cold or hot. You can provide some insulation around it with a blanket or some house insulation, but keeping it around 60 to 75 degrees is ideal for your worms, though they will survive down to freezing temperatures if they have enough bedding. So that's all you need with your bin. Let's talk about bedding. So now that we have our bin and it has air and drainage holes, what's next?
How do we start this bin, Ricky? What goes first?
The next step would be is to put a sheet of paper at the bottom that's also to hold in moisture.
So that one's not torn up, that's just sheet of paper.
And it might be that you want to spray it with a spray bottle just a little bit so it's down. And the next step, you can just shred up papers and put in here. The worms love paper.
All right.
So you can just do that.
You're using newspaper. Is there anything else you might use?
Magazines that are not have the finish on it. Just
no glossy.
No glossy. Or you can have, if you have a paper shredder, you can just add bedding to sprinkle it all around.
And then you feed them. You need to put some food in there.
You sure do. You can use kitchen scraps. Here we have apples. You want to do this in one corner to begin with. Squash, tea bags, carrots.
And you told me I had to take the staples out of the tea bags.
You need to take the staples, yes. Okay, you can use grass clippings if you haven't sprayed with any
Herbicides and yep.
Dead-headed flowers, grasses, any kind of vegetable scraps. Bananas works great. You do not want to use any citrus.
Okay. And did I cut those up small enough for you? Would they like them smaller?
That's fine.
Okay.
That looks good. Just put that in one corner.
Are we ready to add worms now?
We're ready to add worms.
Okay.
Another good thing is your leaves. You'll need brown material for your bin, and also you'll need green material.
Well, as you can see, we had fun making those videos. I have one more, and I know there's probably a lot of questions or details about the bin that you may be wondering about. So we'll go over some of those after this last video. All right. And be putting any questions you have in the chat. Hi, I'm Hannah.
I'm Pat.
And we're going to show you how to start your worm bin.
To get started, you want to put a good layer of your shredded newspaper in the bottom of your bin. Make sure you use just regular newsprint or copy paper, not anything that is like glossy magazine or catalog paper.
So nothing glossy.
Yeah, it needs to be nice and absorbent. And you want it to be good and wet. You could soak it in a bowl and then distribute it, or just give it a good spray, probably a little more than what we're doing here today.
That's a good moist environment for a worm home.
And then you'll want to add your worms and let them get acclimated for a couple of days. And when you go back and they seem to be settled in, you can start adding their food.
Yep. So Pat, can you get worms just from the soil from an outdoor compost bin?
If you know somebody who's already doing some vermicomposting, you might be able to get some worms from them. But your best bet would be a worm farmer, a professional worm farmer, or buy them online. But you don't want to dig them up from your yard. You don't know what kind of worms you're getting. You want specific vermicomposting worms.
Yep. Like Pat said, we want special worm composting worms called red wrigglers. That's what you can ask for. And as you see, I have a handful here. We bought from a local worm farm. And these, it's best to start with about a pound of worms, which is 1,000 worms. But if you have to start with less, you can. Just be very careful not to feed them too much until they really get established. So I'm going to put these worms into their new home. We've prepped this bin with some drainage holes in the bottom, and then we'll put some air holes around the side. And those worms are right now sitting on top of their bedding, but they are gonna go underneath the bedding pretty soon, trying to get out of the light. And then what do we do in a few days, Pat?
Well, you want to make sure that there's a tray underneath, because you have your holes for the drainage. As your worms reproduce and become more numerous, the moisture is going to accumulate in here, and all of this is going to be broken down. When the worms are ready and they're all settled in their new home. We're going to give them finely chopped up, not finely, but small chops of all the vegetables that we've saved in our kitchen scraps. Beautiful. And then we can add some more bedding on top. We want a couple more inches of shredded paper.
Excellent.
And we want to wet that down again. And again, you should probably soak this ahead of time, but give it a lot more spraying than that. And then because remember, your worms want to stay nice and moist, and they like the darkness, we're going to put some sheets of paper over the top.
Great. So these guys will need to be fed about every 2 to 3 weeks, just depending on how fast they're going through the food you're giving them. You don't want to refeed them until you see most of that food is gone, which they've consumed it and pooped it out as worm castings. And those worm castings become really nutrient-rich compost for your garden, which you should be able to harvest in about 4 to 6 months, depending on how fast your worms are working through their food. So, anything else to add, Pat?
You could add a little bit of the compost in to get it started.
Yep.
And keeping your worms in a quiet, dark, appropriate temperature area will help you get your worm compost a little faster.
Yep. Nice job. We have a worm bin.
All right. So that is setting up a worm bin. And then that's what we're going to be doing in the workshop. And I will put a link to register for that, and then you can get all the details about that opportunity. And I think I just want to cover a few more things about managing your worm bin and using the compost from it. So let's see. Okay. I'm going to move through these because I think these were pretty well covered in the video, and I can share the slides with you all so you have the details written down somewhere. This is a close-up of those red wriggler worms, Asenia fetida. And they're ideal for worm composting because they reproduce quickly and they can survive more of a wider variety of habitats and just a little bit more resilient than your garden worms. And then to maintain your worm bin, this is actually a photo of Ricky's worm bin who was in the video. It's best to place it indoors or in a garage or shed where you're not going to have big swings in temperature and out of direct light. Feed your worms with vegetable scraps or eggshells are fine. Some citrus, not much. And always make sure that you're recovering that food with fresh bedding after every time you feed. And especially when you start, be careful not to overfeed the worms. It takes a lot of patience to get a bin going, but once they're productive and more active, then they can actually work through your kitchen scraps pretty well. But at the beginning, don't expect them to be very helpful in taking care of that waste. So start slow. For harvesting vermicompost, there are different ways to do it. Typically in about every four months, you'll be able to do another harvest. One way is to just feed the worms on one side of the bin, and they will all, after a few days, move over to that fresh food to eat, and then you can scrape out the finished compost out of the other side of the bin where the food isn't, and put back any worms you find into your bin. Another way that I've used before is put a tarp out in a sunny location and then kind of make a pyramid of dump out your bin onto the tarp, make a pyramid shape, and those earthworms or those worms will go straight to the center of that pile, and you can just scrape off finished compost from the outside of this pile and save it, and then scoop up that center of the pile and put back into your worm bin. And then common problems I see or get questions on are a bin that has starts smelling bad, attracts flies, or water is collecting in the bottom. And these are really connected to overfeeding the worms not putting enough of the bedding in it, which causes the bin to become too wet. And then that attracts flies and the foul odor, and you get water at the bottom. And if you do have liquid at the bottom of your bin, if you already have a bin and that's an issue, I suggest go ahead and drill more holes in the bottom and leave your lid off under a strong light to help it dry out. And then finally, how do you use compost or vermicompost in your garden? It's a great resource, and I think many gardeners, including myself, see a difference in their plants with adding compost to their planting beds. You can do a 2 to 4 inch top dressing on top of an area prep for gardening, and then mix it into the soil before planting. You can also do this around landscape plants. You can add a half a cup of compost when you're transplanting vegetable starts or other plants that are already growing. And then, like Pat mentioned, it makes, especially vermicompost, makes an excellent seed starting mix to get your plants off to a vigorous start. And that would be 1 part vermicompost to 3 other parts potting media. And if you're ordering compost, a good rule of thumb is to order 1 cubic yard for 100 square foot of garden. And it usually is sold in the cubic yard, so that's a good rate. So takeaway points: keep the right 3-to-1 ratio of browns to greens, aerate your piles. I left a little note in the chat for that. Keep them moist. When they're drying, they need to spray some water over top. And then vermicomposting, it's easy to do in a small space. Don't overfeed your worms. And finally, just use what you have, put it in a place that you can let it rot. And even if you do nothing to it, you will eventually get compost out the other end. So, and here are some resources. I can send these to everyone who's registered through Eventbrite. A composting handout from Clemson Cooperative Extension, and then a composting at home handout from Cornell. And then in North Carolina State University has a great worm composting specialist, and she has a couple of handouts if you want to copy down the names here. Worms can recycle your garbage, and home composting with earthworms. And if you're wanting to get started and looking for a worm supplier, just email me, and I have a list that I can send to you of local worm farms. Okay. And then a big thank you to everyone who's helped with this class: Pat Jakes, Ricky Swain, Rhonda Sherman, who's the compost specialist at NC State, and then my friend Hallie Casey, and 67 Hardware in Jonesville, who provided the worms for our videos. And this compost creature was just too cute to not put on this last slide. So, and thank you all for coming. I'd love to have any questions that people have. It's kind of hard to know if everyone's following on these calls. Let's see. Feel free to unmute if you have a question, if it's easier than typing.